Hi, my name is Dan Davis. Today is a particularly touchy subject, and I wanted to talk about it because it kind of brings home to part of my childhood. Yeah, just a few days ago, Robin Williams killed himself, and it got me to thinking about the whole identity of his career because he was, I mean, to a lot of people, he was a genius. He really was. I don't know where the heck he is now, but I grew up with Robin Williams. I was there. He was insane. He was crazy. But if you watch an interview with him, he's never boring. He just basically throws those jokes out. I I really don't know what to say about his death, but all I can say is that his career is really long and varied. So regardless of how Robin Williams went or what he was like, it's really sad that he suffered from depression. He couldn't do anything about it apparently. But that's more of a what if scenario. Nothing you can do about it. And I'll just remember him. I mean, I grew up. Obviously, like any kid, I loved Aladdin, and I think that is one of his most defining roles because it's one of the few where he's he does in fact use his vocal range and impressions. Through, You've Got a Friend in Me is just a great example of what he could do. And it is interesting because he did like 8 animated movies throughout his career or something. And he really, he was a hysterical stand-up comedian. He wasn't just a great actor, he was a great, stand-up comedian. I watched some of his old stuff. Robin Williams live on Broadway. He goes on and on. He could take one subject and stretch it to 5 minutes and he could just whammer it out. He was improv. He was lightning. He was fast. He was quick. He had wit. That was what Robin Williams was to me. But enough about Robin Williams, stand-up comedian. He was also a great actor. Good Morning Vietnam, Dead Poets Society, The Fisher King, Awakenings, Good Will Hunting, 1 Hour Photo, Insomnia. I think he was a better actor than he was actually a really good comedic actor in a way. I think he was one of those few comedians who could really push it all. I watch him in something like Good Morning Vietnam and he's hysterical. But at the same time, he really has energy. He has emphasis. He has expressions. He's not like, look at me. He's not like, he's not coming up on the screen and saying, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. Why aren't you laughing at me? He never tried to hog the spotlight. He was always nice. I never heard anybody say anything bad about Robin Williams from what I've heard. I wish I got to know the guy, but it's sad. Just remembering him, he had a long variety career. He did stand up in the 70s. He was on Happy Days, and then he got his own spin-off series, Mork and Mindy. And from there, he was able to get a gig role in Robert Altman's Popeye. He did The World According to Garp, And he just kind of sat there for a few years doing some pretty forgettable films. And then he did Good Morning Vietnam, and it sort of, revitalized his career in a way. So he was very popular. And while he was not in the best of shape career-wise by the time he died, he was, I watched something like, it was ironic because he played, he did Patch Adams, he did, Where Dreams May Come, he did Awakenings. He played 3 characters who basically, in those films he played 3 characters who who tried to avoid death and didn't believe in suicide and stuff like that. It was, and I watched The Birdcage the other night, and it is interesting because he did occasionally try to tone himself down. His detractors always said, oh, look, there's Robin Williams. He's going to ham it up. He's going to scream. But really, I never saw him once phoning it in. He always had energy. He was maniacal, but he knew. I watched something like Mrs. Doubtfire, and he's going all over the place, basically. Or, I mean, I mentioned the birdcage. He does downplays the role. I mean, he does a slight accent, but, he gives it to Nathan Lane, who basically, is basically hamming it up, overacting. And in comparison to him, who's giving a much more restrained performance. And The Fisher King is another one I love him in, because I mentioned it. He's crazy in that film, but it works well given that his character suffers. He's basically mentally ill, and he believes he's obsessed, but he's just terrific in that film, and it really showed. I mean, he may be dead, but he did leave us with a lot of things to look back at. I'll just never get over the ending of Hook where he says to live will be an awfully big adventure, because it really hits home to me now that had to happen. It's just so sad. And regardless of what he was a great comedian. He really knew his stuff. He's an inspiration. I think people always say, there'll never be another Robin Williams. That's the thing. He's one of a kind. There'll never be anybody who had his wit, who had his intelligence, who had his humor. He just, to hear, everything is so sad. I mean, looking back at his career, people always say, oh, he was in a lot of bad movies, but I still enjoyed most of them, just because he was in it. I don't think they would have been half as good if he wasn't in them, because, I love him in Good Will Hunting, and I think he got a well-deserved Oscar for that. And I think back, and he was in some recent movies, like I loved him as Dwight Eisenhower in The Butler, for example, recently, because he can play certain presidents. I think, his last film, one of his final films is Night at the Museum 3, and he plays, a pup Theodore Roosevelt in those films. And I think he's perfect for that role. And I would have loved to have seen him play Theodore Roosevelt in a much more serious film. But we got what we got. And I think about all the comedians I've liked throughout my life, Jim Carrey, Bill Murray, I think Tom Hanks counts, all the ones comedic actors or whatever. And he was vastly different. I don't know if that was in a good or a bad way, but his stand-up, like I mentioned, was hilarious. He talks about something like golf or, the rights to people. He had monologues. He knew how to write a monologue. Actually, he didn't even write. So a lot of his stuff was improvised. That was the great thing. He was a great improviser. He could just spat out something completely random, and you would laugh. You would laugh. It didn't matter if it was like what? If you didn't get it. It was just hysterical. The whole thing was. And wherever he is, if Robin Williams is up there in the big sky or whatever, wherever he just wanted to thank you, Robin. You were a really great inspiration, and even though you're dead, you will live forever in movies. Bye.